Cool.
However, inevitably, you always come across problems. You come across questions. You go, well, man, I've tried to do this and I just can't get it to work and everything. And if this is a network that we can share knowledge, then so that would be wonderful.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan, and certainly SolidWorks has a little more power, modeling power than Fusion 360 does. And just for my background, I'm leading the SIG. I was doing a little bit of teaching of Fusion 360, but we're kind of moving it more into discussion group and SIG and support. But still, I want to take little subjects to push on a little bit to help people understand, because a lot of people are coming from SketchUp or 2D tools. So parametric design, 3D parametric design is new to a lot of people. So this is
I think I've gone through your earlier sessions that are available to look at, and oh no, I still find them helpful.
Oh, good.
You know, sometimes it may be simple stuff, but if you've never traversed that water, you don't know that. And you go, oh, that's how they do it. I always been doing it the hard way.
Yeah, the little gotchas, and that's certainly group knowledge is great for that kind of thing. Sharing hints and best practices.
Especially when you watch somebody else do it real time.
Yeah, yeah.
So
there are a lot of different ways to do things. I found
there are.
It's, some are easy and some you get there, but it takes a little bit more twisting and turning.
And you say, I wish I never have to do that again. But it will be back there again.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and there's each tool seems to have its own little idiosyncrasies and odd bugs. I'll get into one of the ones that I ran into tonight. With a project that we showed last week. And it looks like we're just going to have the small group. I probably should have been a little better about getting information out and to Travis and stuff. And like I say, he's busy. I think he's in Houston, and then he's helping out with a V-carve training session for CNC. Pat Duffy's course in the club, which I took that a couple months ago, and I've been playing with the Shapokos in the member shop a fair bit. In fact, I was in there today. So I'll cover some of that. And in fact, maybe that's a place to start. So unless anyone has specific questions.
Well, I don't know who the rest of the group is.
Okay, yeah, let's introduce ourselves. So my background was actually mechanical engineering pro engineer. So going from pro to Fusion 360 was a big step down in a ways, but I was impressed initially with how much power it did have for a hobbyist tool. SolidWorks I played with a little bit and done a few products with, but never really got proficient at. And woodworking, I'm not the most proficient at either. I've always dabbled a little bit, but I'm trying to get better at it now. So my background's in mechanical engineering. Now, Andy, you told me a little bit about yourself, but maybe you can tell the rest of the group now too.
Hi guys. I studied luthier, so I did some guitar building, random woodworking. I work at a shop, so I use a CNC every day, automatic tool changing CNC, but we use en route. We don't use V-carve. I have a little bit of experience with that. I used to go to Maker Place and learn some CNC and laser engraving there. I'm just trying to learn Fusion 360 because I have no experience with any sort of, anything like this. Just Corel Draw and en route pretty much.
So basically trying to make the 2D to 3D transition.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Doug, tell us about yourself.
Okay. Kind of a jack of all trades. I used to, way back since the 70s or 80s, I used to always change professions every 3 or 4 years. So I've been lots of different things. I like learning about a lot of different things. But I got into 3D printing, built my own 3D printers. I got 2 built here that I built myself, and mainly use open source software. I'm a software engineer by profession. That's one of my degrees, and really got tired of Windows and the failures back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So went to Unix and been there ever since. So I'm more of a find the tool that fits. So for instance, with stuff for my 3D printers, lasers, or CNC, I have separate slicer software for that. I don't use the slicers in the tools. I choose a slicer that fits the job. I've normally did for CAD. Since I started doing 3D printing, I started learning CAD. And since I'm a software developer, there's a tool called OpenSCAD that you code the CAD elements. You literally type, cube with some parameters, some specifications, and you get a 3D cube. You do a union to combine things. You do differences to subtract. You just type the commands. And so I've been able to do a heck of a lot with that. Almost everything I've done has been with that. But it was trying to do things to strengthen it with fillets and things like that, which really got to be a pain, coding the pieces, the intersections and stuff. So I wanted to get into the GUI based stuff. And I had tried FreeCAD years ago and could not wrap my head around it. But it wasn't until I was able to get Fusion 360 running through Wine on Linux, which is a layer, and was able to get Fusion. So it's been a blast doing this stuff with the class, taking 3D designs, exporting them to STLs, slicing them, and then having the CNC cut them up. Ran into a few hiccups, and so I went back and tried FreeCAD, and I was surprised now that how much I understood. Having Tim kind of showed the process, and I was like, wow, oh yeah, that's how you do it. Oh, that's what happens. Few little nuances, but other than that, it's kind of neat being able to switch tools, especially at this level. Well, I'm still a beginner, but just to be able to pick up another tool and be able to go, okay, what do I do? Sketch this, okay, extrude, do this, and I was able to figure it out and get through it, and so it's been pretty cool. Another tool in the belt, as they say, and this is it's been a good group, and it's been fun seeing everybody hash through problems and figure out different ways to solve them.
Yeah,
That's good.
one of the things is feel free to bring things to the group, questions, problems, things you run into, or bring them to the forum. I try and check the forum from time to time as well and address questions. Parametric 3D design, there's a commonality through pretty much all the tools. There's just different user interfaces, and sometimes you do things in a different order and things are given different names, etc. But the large learning curve is to learn how to design using a 3D parametric modeler. After that, moving from one to another is not too big of a step. Looks like Paul is joining us, and just in time, since the four of us have already introduced ourselves, he's going to have to introduce himself to us if he. finds his
So
unmute
many
button.
of this group are retired or still working hard.
I am mostly retired.
Mostly retired. Okay.
So, at this point, lately, it's only been a couple hours a month of consulting that I still do, but so I'm pretty much retired.
Okay. So am I. No consulting. I'm just retired.
I'm a stay-at-home dad still, even though my daughter's 10 years old. I kind of like it.
Okay.
Andy looks too young to be retired. Here, let me. Sorry,
Well,
I muted you there, Andy.
Yeah, he
There's-
does CNC for a living, so he's running machines during the day.
Yeah.
I'm not retired yet. I wish.
What is the CNC machine that you're running?
It's a multicam. That's the name of the company that manufactures it.
Mm-hmm. And you're cutting.
We cut, so we do retail displays, so we do a lot of Centra or acrylic and plywood. But like downtime, I like to try to do some 3D stuff. There's like you could do some 3D in the en-route software, but it's like pretty hard to design on that. So I could, if I learn Fusion 360, I could import meshes into that software and then make a toolpath.
Cool. So, Paul, we were introducing ourselves. Are you shy or are you going to join in?
Sure, I'll give my 2 cents.
Go for it.
Yeah. Status for me, kind of forced into retirement. So while I'm in retirement, learning Fusion, taking care of machines at the member shop for the late and the CNC, and learning some AWS services along the way, and always looking to, haven't really made, I guess I'm just a professional student, if you will.
Okay, Paul. Well, the two people here that I don't think you know are Jerry, who's joining us from the Woodturners Association.
Yeah.
And Andy, you heard a little bit. He's doing CNC for a living and looking to expand into 3D. So, does anybody have any questions or problems at the top of their head right now, and that we could either take a look at or I can table to investigate later if it's not something that can be useful in the top of my head?
I don't have anything at this point other than learning more about Fine Woodwork Association.
Okay, well, I'm going to just briefly review a bowl that we did last session, and I kind of evolved it a little further, learned a few things, and there is a thread on the forums you can look at. But I thought I would share progress with the group tonight. So let me just share my screen here.
All right, I'm going to mute myself, both with video and audio, but I'm going to be listening to you until I'm done eating.
I'll be doing that in about an hour.
Okay.
50,
Whoops.
30 minutes.
Where am I here? Whoops. Let's see. Let's
So
go
I saw
back.
your latest, and while I like that you didn't round the edges, I thought that for a fruit bowl, You might end up damaging the fruit a little bit with some of those sharp corners.
Sharp corners. Yeah, I did break the corners with sandpaper, and you know, one could take that further. Turned out I actually like to look better without it.
Crisp.
So the just for those who haven't seen it before, the idea is that this is a CNC project out of one piece of wood. So it's a project. Let me just kind of step through it. So basically, I started with a piece of wood, and then I'm milling slots. I didn't actually do this in the same order that the machining would happen. This is sort of in product design order. And so you cut 5 rings or tiers, and then raise them up, offset them by material thickness, and give them a twist. And so you get almost kind of a basket type. Now this shows 45 degrees, which is what I ended up with. This is all parametrically driven. So if you look at the parameter list here, I have a material thickness, the width of the cutter, the width of the tier, so that's the slot between the cutters paths, the maximum width of the material itself, and then a chamfer when I had a chamfer in there, which I've actually taken out. The cut increment is simply to make modeling simpler, so it's the addition of 2 other parameters. And then I have this twist angle, so you can change the twist angle. And in fact, it's kind of interesting because part of the fun of having this tool, and then I have dowel pins in there and details with the dowel pins. So for example, if you change this from 45 degrees to 40 degrees, and I'm changing it in small steps because sometimes Fusion 360 seems to get a little bit confused. You could actually get down to something that's almost more of a spiral. And so I kind of liked this approach initially. And I thought, well, that has a little bit more of a unique design to it. And I cut one out with a piece of scrap wood I had. And it follows these parameters. And wood was 11 inches wide. I think it was basically a 1x12, so 3/4 of an inch thick and 11 and a half or 11 and a quarter wide. And it happened to have been stained beforehand, so it made it a little more obvious. I do like the twist when you look into the bowl from the top. When you look from the side, it sometimes looks a little bit odd. I don't know. So I decided next to try the 45 degrees. So the next one I tried, I picked up an 18-inch wide piece of pine. And so I went 18 inches, and it makes a heck of a big bowl. So this is a bowl. I thought I'd like to have a lot of fruit around the house. Let's go for a big one. That's actually a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be somehow.
You got a watermelon.
Exactly, yeah. CAD fools you with how big and how small things are sometimes. You design something, looks really cool, then you go and print it on the 3D printer and it's tiny. This was the opposite.
It's a grapefruit bowl.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah, a lot of grapefruits, or like Doug says, watermelons. So then the last one I did, this one's actually for the shop. This is a piece of sapele that Dallas procured for me. And he wants to have this as part of the demo of the digital tools part of the shop. So Fusion 360 plus the CNC. I made this on the Shapeoko XXL as well. And it looks very dark at the moment. I found it as soon as I put the, I used the butcher or cutting board oil, mineral oil, to finish it. It really, really darkened the wood. But boy, this wood really mills nicely. It looks good. It's kind of it's an African wood that's very like a mahogany, but a little denser, a little heavier than some mahoganies. And but it came out pretty well, I think. Now, the interesting thing from a Fusion 360 point of view is it illuminated some glitches. And one of those glitches is the fact that it will sometimes lose the sketch plane for later features. So the features we've done so far, we did the cuts, we lifted the tiers, we spun them around, and then the next steps I did was I put in the dowel pins at the intersections of tiers. And we don't really see them here unless I highlight them. So there's a dowel pin.
Your screen at this time, Tim.
Oh, is that, are you seeing my screen? No?
No.
Oh. Wow, what are you're not seeing the shared screen.
I'm seeing it.
I see it.
Oh.
I see it.
Okay, then it's on my end. All right, thanks.
Yeah, there should, you might have two, click on your Zoom app and then you might be able to find another, you should be able to have the gallery of people in one area and the shared screen in another.
Okay, yeah, continue, thanks.
Okay, at any rate, after putting all the pins in, I then did a rotational, oops, that was too far. I did a rotational pattern and to make a group of them. And then I flattened it out again. But the problem is that when you change some of the parameters, Fusion 360 gets confused and we lose some of the dowel pin holes. And I have not been able to figure a workaround for that yet. I tried a few things. I thought maybe the extra edges from doing the chamfers were causing problem. But when I took the chamfers out and redid the holes, they were still unreliable. So.
But it also looked like the dowel pins weren't centered. They were slowly migrating towards an edge. You see?
Yeah, so the reason for that, was that they are, let's just go to the end here, this point now. So they are located, they're dimensioned with regards to the straight edges, but depending what you do with the angles, they end up in the radius.
Okay. Yeah, those look right this time. The last time you showed it, they were slowly migrating towards the outside edge. And by the time you got to the third hole,
they were missing.
Yeah, the next one was going to be right out in the gap.
In the gap. So what happens is, if we go with a smaller rotation angle, these holes move over in this direction.
Yeah.
So if, let's look from the top. These holes are are dimensioned with regard to the straight edge of the tier. And so out here, they can end up in the hole. So if you want to use small angles, you have to use a smaller radius here to force the radii to be smaller all the way out.
And you were saying in the post on the forum that Fusion seems to be doing something different with those corner segments there, because you tried to export this as a 3D model, and it
Yeah.
segmented it, so it's looking at those radiuses as something different. And
Well, I'm
maybe
not
that's-
sure if it's Fusion doing it or the Fusion export file or the import into vCarve, because I was using vCarve.
Well, you can look at it with, you can look at the 3D part with any viewer. So there's a bunch of different ways to look at the STL. You could bring it into a 3D printer slicer, just to see if it's, you know, like Prusa and I think the slicer with the 3 on it. They'll tell you
Right.
if there's an issue with the STL, and you can repair the STL. But so there's a number of ways you can look at the STL to know if that's where the problem is.
So I used STL, I used OBJ, and I used SketchUp file. And I did DXF.
Well, that
So I
was
tried a little bit of everything.
right. That was your export, but then you imported into vCarve, which is really like a 2D carving thing, right? So-
vCarve will take in a 3D model as well.
Yeah.
And the challenge when I use a 3D model, first of all, it would run the slot twice because it did both sides of the slot, which just took up a lot of extra time. Not a big deal if you have one at home, but it is a bigger deal when you have a 3-hour time slot at the member shop.
So why would it do it twice?
It seemed to
Two
be
edges.
machining one side and then the other, even though it was a 1/8 slot.
So it's a 1/8 slot, a 1/8 bit,
Yeah.
and it still wanted to clean it one direction, clean it the other.
Correct.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And then if I brought it in too much as 2D, then the holes would come in as bitmapped holes, which was problematic. So I actually ended up using SketchUp and bringing it in as vectors. And that worked the best, except that this one outside edge came in with kind of like, I'm not sure if you can see it now or not, but
Little segments.
you kind of see the segments, but then when you zoom in, you can tell it's an arc. But it
Okay.
came in as segments, and it machined as segments. And then I just sanded it out. But none of the interior ones were. So had I known that, I would have just offset a vector from one of these. But that's kind of getting away from the whole idea of do it in CAD and export a file rather than kind of recreate it to some extent in vCarve.
Yeah, my whole goal is to do 3D, to basically do everything in 3D and just let the slicer handle it.
That's the way it should work.
Yeah.
Jerry?
No, I was just going to say, did the relationship of the holes possibly be influenced by the rule set that you have in the parametric?
What happens is if you change parameters dramatically, it gets confused. If you change the parameters gradually by a small amount at a time, it doesn't seem to get as confused. And what happens is, let me pull this back to here. So what basically happens is I define the sketch plane. If we look at, let's say we look at this pin here, right over here. So the sketch plane for this pin is this surface here. So I pick this surface and then I place the circle and I dimension it from the outside of the outside edge of the smaller tier and the inside edge of the larger tier. And I have a parameter in there, which is right now half times the tier width. And part of the reason I did that problem that Doug noticed earlier, that it goes wandering into the crack, is in some cases I said, well, if I only went 0.3 or 0.4 times the tier width in, that would pull it back closer to the center of the tier, even after it's gone around the curve.
Ah, so that's why you're saying the curve, because you reference the line of the straight segment,
Correct.
not the whole like internal.
No, the dimensioning's not that dynamic. In
Yeah.
Fusion 360, that's going to fail.
I mean, you do fillets and all those things by selecting those edges.
Right.
But in this case, they're like separate pieces still.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
There might be another way to do it. Like maybe you could use a construction line around there and then put the hole on the construction line. Again, like Jerry was saying earlier, like we were having the discussion earlier, there's so many different ways to do the same thing. Some of them work better than others. So I toyed with the idea, since it's losing the sketch plane, is there a way, should I use construction plans? Or should I use a construction line that follows the curvature and put the circle in the construction line? And, these are simple little things that might work, might not. And that's something I want to play around with some more. I mean, this is just kind of it's become not an obsession, but kind of a fun little project. Because it was something I was looking for things that would be a good little Fusion 360 demo of a couple of techniques so people can learn from it. And then also I wanted to learn a bit more about using the CNC, although what I have not done yet, and I know there was a SIG, 1 or 2 SIGs when I was away in the spring, where somebody actually went through that. And there is the manufacturer workspace, or what's left of it for the free version, to generate tool paths.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm used to doing, is dropping right down into the manufacturing side and put together the tool path and then test the tool path. But you called here and went into a different cam.
It's on my to-do list, and I had a couple of finishing projects and some CNC projects, but I'm going on a little trip, and I'm going to have 2 weeks in quarantine. So I think part of those 2 weeks in quarantine are going to be to figure out how to use a manufacturer workspace instead of VCarve, and see if I can use that to solve a lot of my issues.
Well, I think it's a cool little project, and everything is pretty straightforward except your little holes. The holes are not beginner content.
Yeah, the holes are a little bit weird. And then in order to get the tooling holes, I did have to machine from both sides. So what I did was basically, when I have my piece of wood on the table, then I put 4 additional tooling holes, 1 in each corner. I initially tried, and one of them I tried 2, but there was too much slop. That wasn't reliable. So I put 4 3/8" dowel pins, using those tooling holes between the material and the spoil board.
No. Realistically, you didn't have to do both sides, but it's kind of cool. That's such a cool concept. I like that with the dowel pins and the thing. Theoretically, because it's symmetrical, you could have done all the holes on one, at the top, and just flip the pieces over. Oh no, that's right, because they got pins on both sides.
Well, yeah, pins on both sides.
Yep.
Yeah, pins on both sides. You can't. So yeah, it's kind of a fun one. I'm looking for another project like this that I can use to do some Fusion 360 exploration and share with the group, and something that people at different skill levels can pick up from, and then go make it using the CNC machine.
What's your cutter width? What's the cutter width in there? Is that 1/8 inch?
I used 1/8 inch in this case.
Okay, and the software that you're working allows you to take and create an 1/8 inch rectangle all the way around there, and then it just goes versus that maybe multiple times for different depths, and it just makes one cut all the way around.
Correct. Yeah, I used VCarve, and I used for example, I used this vector all the way around, and said cut a profile outside the line using the 1/8, and I gave it a pass depth. So in this case, it was 3/4 of an inch, and I probably used, say, a 75 thou pass depth. It would take 10 passes to do it.
I have not learned in Fusion 360 how to do what you just did using their CAM. It seems as if the manufacturing side assumes that you have a cut side and then you have stock that's ultimately going to be removed. And it wants to come down, move over, get moving, and then make your finished cut. And that's why it always likes to do two sides. And now I've had to fool it sometimes by saying, instead of a 125 slot width, I'd make it 4 thousandths larger. And then it's happy. But on the second cut, it would just fly through there really, really fast. But I've never figured out in Fusion 360 how to have a singular cut that was the same width as the tool.
Interesting. I'll like I say, I want to see what the
sure,
what
when
the Fusion 360
we
tools
can
do.
talk more.
I wanted to first, I didn't really have a background in CNC, so I wanted to first kind of learn how to use CNC. So I 3D CAD I've been doing for years, but CNC I've been doing for 2 months. So while I understand the principles of CNC, you know, doing it in the flesh is a whole different kettle of fish.
Well, my experience in doing the CAD or using the Shipoko that I have is, before you take your NC file down there and put it on there, check it and check it again and check it again, and then air run that thing and air run it again. And if it isn't doing something that you think it's supposed to be doing, check it again before you dare put that cutter in good wood.
Yeah, that's why the first bowl was made with a scrap piece of wood, and the second one was made with a piece that cost $6. And the third one was actually made with wood that was free to me, although I think it's expensive wood.
Well, see, that's exactly the way to do it. And tell me how I know, because of the number of mistakes I've made. Oh, there goes a good piece of wood.
Yeah, expensive firewood. Yeah, and then, you know, CNC projects, one other project I did, it's not really a Fusion 360 one, but it's a classic V-carve one, and that's an inlay. So I have an inlay where I have maple in walnut, and this is a box lid. And
I like that a lot. In fact, actually, I have one here.
I realize that's some college's logo that I appropriated, and I'm not making money on it, so I don't care. They can't sue me. Just happen to like it. Oh, yeah?
This is a epoxy inlay on a platter. And my next one I'm working on is not to do an epoxy one, but actually walnut in what would be in the bottom of a platter or in the bottom of a bowl, and then just use the Shipoko and a design like that, put it in there, and then glue it all together, and then finish the whole bowl. And I'm anxious to get to actually do that. So this is just a conceptual piece, but it's exactly what you were talking about there. Only you had two pieces of you had a pattern, and that when you put the piece of wood in there, it was a perfect fit.
I made a male, yeah, the female in the walnut and the male in the maple here, and then laminate them together, and then cut off the maple and sand it down.
And what are, okay, so those are all random shapes.
Yeah, so it's really just two pieces of wood.
Yeah, isn't the process called V carving?
Yeah, it is V carving.
And that's where they get their name. But it's two pieces of wood with one positive, one negative that are CNC'd so that the pieces fit inside the other, and then you cut off the.
And I'm using a 60-degree V-bit so that basically the two pieces that go together, you clamp them, and they have a sloped surface, so they're gonna get nice and tight. So you can see I've got pretty good tight fit all the way around. So V-carve is using the V-bit to carve a shape, and so I've done a double V-carve. V-carve female in the walnut and a V-carve male in the
Yeah,
maple.
it's pretty cool, Jerry. The software that does the V-carving, you basically give it the design, and it knows you just got to switch a couple of parameters on it for it to cut the groove on one side, and then the negative for the other side gets carved out. So that way you got a V that you want, like where you put your epoxy. Instead, the next piece is a V that then fits right in there with a little bit of overlap. See, my fingers are out here. Yep. And what happens is when you put glue in here and glue that in, you now have room for a saw to shave that all off, and you get your nice inlay in what's in there.
One of the things that I'm confronted is that I don't have a clean cut like a saw, because that's just a free-handed operation on a lathe. And so
yeah, you're going to have a challenge there.
Well, I have already made some, or we're developing coasters where I put a star, and there are 2-inch star and a 3-inch coaster.
So you're using straight walls on the side?
Yep.
Okay.
And I got it down to the point where I had about 3,000 gap.
Oh, that's pretty good.
And when you color the glue and put the thing all together and everything, because in the bottom of a bowl, I got to have this thing at least 300 thousandths, maybe 350 thousandths deep to be able to manage the bowl. And because when you're working the contours of a bowl on the inside, you don't exactly know where that surface is going to end up.
Right, right.
Because you do it by feel.
Well, the V-carve technique, you know, some people use a 15-degree V-bit, some use a 60, some use a 90. For a piece like that, what worried me about the 15-degree is I found that sometimes the act of clamping it together caused warpage because you actually forced too much material together on one side of the finished board.
Well, I look forward to learning more about V-carve, because it's just another tool in the toolbox.
Exactly. And then the people who are doing, some people are doing this kind of inlay in flooring. I think they're maybe using something like the Shaper Origin. And they like a much smaller angle, like the 15 degrees, because after a few years, you may be sanding that floor down again and refinishing it. And you don't want your lines getting wider or thinner by much as you sand the wood down. And this one's pretty simple. I have another one that's being clamped right now, but it's a very intricate design. I'm not sure it's going to work. But I hope so.
So that whole project gave me the opportunity to learn about the X and Y stiffness on the Shapoko, and the need to actually make all of your parts exactly the same orientation you intend them to go together, so that the cumulative errors are negated. But you know, it's really hard to get a round circle on a Shapoko.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about using the V-bit, is that really you clamp it till they're tight. And so a lot of areas you don't get much gap. So I might have, I'm going to have to look with the magnifying glass here to see how much gap do I have. There's a couple places I have close to between 5 and 10 thousandths. But you don't really see it unless you're looking close.
Well, that's right. As a craftsman, you learn how to hide that stuff.
The craftsman isn't the one who makes the mistakes. It's the one who knows how to hide them, right?
Right.
Okay, well any other comments on this bowl or this approach or CNC with Fusion 360 or CAD? Had a couple of other.
I think it's a unique, very, very interesting project that you've got here.
Yeah, it was a fun one. I found, I was looking for things to make on the CNC. It's like, okay, I'm doing the inlays. I want something else to do as well. And so I was late at night just browsing through a bunch of videos on YouTube. And I saw somebody who had like, you know, their 10 favorite CNC items. And this was one of them. And I immediately saw that this would also be a good Fusion 360 application. So I thought I would take advantage of the parametric approach so that you can change the thickness of the material, the size of the material, the size of the dowel pins, all kinds of things like that, and then see what the results are like. I should look back at my notes. What did we promise we were going to do today? Okay. Group input. Oh, I did want to talk a little bit about, we talked about it last week a little bit, and I want to go over it again because for people who aren't used to parametric modeling and structured assemblies, it can be a little bit confusing. So this is a model of a little laser engraver. This is a less than $200 diode laser engraver that a bunch of people in the club all bought the same thing so that we can, you know, learn from each other and all that kind of thing. So I wanted to make a different interface plate. So I modeled it. And, you know, I come from I had a lot of experience in manufacturing and products for manufacturing. So the idea of a nested bill of materials or assembly, sub-assembly, etc., comes fairly natural to me at this point, but it isn't for everybody. So one thing that's different in a parametric modeler is you have this concept of components and assemblies, and then you can have assemblies of assemblies. So in this case, the top assembly is the entire product. So this is my Ortur Laser Master 20 watt. And all these objects are part of the top assembly. But kind of like an organizational chart or something of that nature, or you could also think of it like a folder structure on a computer for files. So what I have is sub-assemblies. So one sub-assembly is the laser carriage. So you see it highlight, and the laser carriage includes a bunch of things that make up this chunk. And in this case, I've organized it by what parts move together. And that's a logical approach. Other products might have a different assembly organization by whatever logic makes sense, and you figure out your own. And in here, so the laser carriage assembly, it has a laser module, it has a lens, it has a fan, there's a bunch of fasteners, spacers, what else have we got here? You know, things like that. And they all make up, all these are components within the laser carriage subassembly. The laser carriage subassembly is part of the top assembly. Now this is a little confusing here because I actually replicated the laser carriage assembly. I should be highlighting this one. And that brings up another point though. If you have a reason to have multiple sub-assemblies in an assembly, then part of your organization of what goes in that sub-assembly is probably going to be all the things that you want to replicate when you replicate the assembly. You might have 2, 3, 4, or 5 of the same sub-assembly within an assembly, depending on what your product is. And where this gets tricky is you need to keep in mind what you're working on. So you have to tell, in this case, Fusion 360, what level you're making a change to. Are you making a change to a specific component, to its sub-assembly that it's in, or to the top level assembly? And the way that we designate that is called activation. So we activate the component for work. So right now the top level is active. So whatever I create or make at this point will be relevant to the top level. If I want to do something within the laser mount assembly, for example, then I should activate it. Now I can come over here and work on it. I might want to right click and say isolate, which is going to turn off everything else except my the assembly that I isolated. Now I can come in here. Whoops. Let's redo that. That was an accident. I can come in here and make changes to components in this subassembly, knowing that I have activated the subassembly and I'm only seeing it. So the concept is breaking your complicated assembly into smaller assemblies that are less complicated, and generally there's some kind of logic in your product that tells you how you want to structure your sub-assemblies, what sub-assembly things should go into. As I said, in this case, my sub-assemblies relate to elements that move in this product. Oops.
I'm also guessing that when you do these assemblies, you reference them off of a 0 plane, and then once you have the assembly, you have a translation of the assembly into the higher level assembly to get them where you want them, or
yeah,
how do you do
so
it?
yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because in some other CAD systems, I mean, I grew up in CAD where you first defined those structures and then you built the part in place. Here you build it in place, and you can build it without really defining the relationships between those components in the subassembly. But when you're ready to do that, that's when you use the assembly joints, and you define relationships between components and assemblies using joints. So rather than just placing this screw in this hole, you can actually use a joint to specify that the screw goes in the hole and the surface matches here, so that when this moves, then the screw would move with it. See, in this case, that wasn't done. So the screws are not registered to this plate. So if I move the plate, the screws don't move.
This is
But
a pretty heavy.
had I joined them
example.
properly, they might. Say again?
I was saying that for a user group that is the nature of this group, this is a pretty complex example.
It is. It is. It definitely
And,
is.
you know, the idea that you have a bill of material, or not a bill of material, but a master structure, I think that's the only way to do it, and you've done that in here, I think, perfectly. And I think most people can adapt to what you have here and the organization of that, because it sort of makes sense. It's just common knowledge. And
The main point I wanted to make here wasn't even the more complicated assemblies, but it was being aware of what level is activated when you're trying to do things. And if you've activated the wrong thing, if you've activated this assembly, but meanwhile you come down to this assembly and you try and copy paste something, where's it going to end up? Right? So if you do, say you do a move copy and you create a copy and you move this thing out there, and then you say, okay. Now, where did the copy go? Is the copy, where is this copy? Maybe I can't find it.
it's
Oh,
at
yeah.
your, it's at your active.
It's at my active level, right? So you see
Right.
now when I pick on this, the laser mount assembly shows the dotted line, dashed line underneath it, sort of slanted dashed line underneath it. And that means that I'm looking at something inside it. So when I open it up, there it is. It got added to the bottom of the laser mount assembly because it was activated, even though I pulled that out of a different assembly when I copied it.
Hmm.
So it's just a little reminder to pay attention to what level. If you have an assembly with multiple components, especially if you have sub-assemblies, pay attention to what the activation level is.
Yeah, especially when you can grab parts from other assemblies and
Just
like you
move
just
around.
did, bring them in and they end up as, yeah,
Yeah, you know.
you get lost pretty easily.
Yeah, exactly. That was a point I wanted to make today, and that's about what I have. We can either have a little discussion about, I know we've had discussions on the forums about what's happening with the reduced functionality, Autodesk cutting back on functionality in the free version, or have we beat that one to death elsewhere? And it is what it is, and we're going to have to live with it. I don't know how, if people have questions about that. I know that Doug's been looking at FreeCAD as an alternative because of it.
Well, it was that, and the real kicker was I don't like changing tools or versions if I don't have to. If things are working well, and just I didn't like the fact that what had happened was I was working on this design and I could not figure out, I was doing fillets in the sketch, and then I could not do some of the things once I went into the 3D side of things, it wasn't letting me do it. And so I asked Tim for some help, and Tim mentioned, yeah, you can't do that. You got to do your fillets after, once you get into the 3D world. And he sent me a copy of what he had done because I had sent him my design, and I couldn't open it. And I was like, it was saying I was my version was out, and I need to upgrade. And I'm going, I just installed this like a month ago. And I looked at what the newest version was, and it was like, mine was like 2.9.16. The new version was 2.9.20. I mean, we're talking about 3 points down for versioning.
Minor version.
And yet I could not open Tim's model.
Yeah, that's disappointing.
And it was like, oh man, really? That was not necessary. They really don't change. They shouldn't be changing file structures and stuff.
Let me comment on that, because that's been frustrating for CAD guys from the beginning of CAD. And right now, instead of owning the software, which you can own the software, let me say, for example, like SolidWorks, you buy SolidWorks and you end up with a seat, and what I have is 2016. Well, guess what? It's 4 years old already at this point in time. And there are multiple upgrades that occur year after year after year. In fact, they do it 4 times a year. But you actually, if you don't upgrade and somebody creates something in a more recent version, I can't open it. And well, as a retired guy, I don't care so much anymore because I'm not going to be interfacing with a whole lot of people. But when you're running a business and you do that, only with that, you got to pay $1,000 to upgrade annually. And so Fusion's doing the same thing, in which only with theirs, if you have a pro version or the professional versions, you're going to get the upgrades whether you like it or not. I mean, Microsoft is doing the same thing. They've been doing it for a really long time. And the days of owning your software, you can't make money. It's an economic decision by the supplier of software, and they're figuring out exactly how to not let you own it because they can derive greater revenue by going with the streaming model or the cloud model.
Yeah. The recurring revenue is liked much more by the analysts and by the investors. So subscription revenue is worth history. A lot more than one-time sale revenue. So yeah, that's the economics of it. I think there's a difference though between a major release and a minor release. And generally, I know with PTC, with Pro Engineer, you were compatible within the same major release. So if you had, the 2016 version and somebody else had 2016.3, the files were still compatible. They wouldn't change.
That's true. That's true with SolidWorks as well. It is.
And what Doug pointed out is that wasn't the case with Fusion 360, and that was a rude surprise.
Yeah, that kind of like threw me off because I was like, oh my goodness, I have to update every month or something to keep.
And we ran into that with vPro as well.
Yeah.
So vPro kind of does some of that. And what happens is in the club, we all use the free version of vPro to do a bunch of work at home. And then when we go to the shop, we take our file, plug it in, and the MakerPlace version that the shop has a license, and then it brings it up and allows you to generate G-code because the free version won't generate G-code.
One of the things that we did at work all the time was all our suppliers and our customers, we'd all pick a time, generally third quarter, in which we're going to make the switch from 2016 to 2017. We never wanted to be bleeding edge. We would drag it out as long as we possibly could, but all the suppliers and all the customers, we'd all switch at the same time.
That works if you can get all your customers and suppliers to coordinate, but you have some customers want one way, some customers want another way, then the supplier gets.
Well, then it doesn't work so good.
Well, being somebody who's been in software for decades, some of the stuff where you don't own the right to work with your, this rental thing, you don't own the right to access your data, your intellectual property, without paying a rental fee is really weird. Because I used to do configuration management where when we built a project, we could literally check in binary blobs of a software tool that we could put into the software package, into the configuration management. So we knew if 10 years later we checked this thing out, we could build our software and still and make the product. You can't do that now. because
Yeah.
you don't own the software. You only have a rental agreement. If you tried to bring that up, it would say you can't run your program. You're not current, and which is kind of that's the side of me that's kind of throws me for a loop, is not being able to buy Fusion 360 and own it for 5 years, or own, have a copy that you can own. So that was the other thing that got me with Fusion. You can't buy it. They switch version or file formats at the
Minor version.
subversion level. And then, the kicker was when they started pulling out features. When they pulled out, well, they put one back. So when they weren't going to allow, they pulled out STL export, but then we found that there's one place you can still do that, and they pulled out step. And they also limited, when they do the G code generation, they actually eliminate quick moves. They eliminated in the G code output quick moves. So this is a blatant, manipulation of the thing to make it not easy
Not
to
useful.
use, and not, to force you to basically buy the stuff and pay the annual subscription. And when you look at how many companies have made a good living by basically getting the community, getting schools, and getting people to use their software, and then once you get into it, start making money off it, people start using the tool to make things and selling things, and then that's where you pay the licensing fees.
And I can think of no company who did that more than Autodesk in the early days.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They made it easy. They made it easy to pirate so that everybody would use it at home. They gave it free to students, and so it became an industry standard. And then they started to police corporate use, and did pretty well at that. And they seem to almost have forgotten that lesson here, because Fusion 360 was becoming very popular, and it's on its way to becoming that standard that everybody learns to use and everybody knows. But what they're claiming is they're concerned that people are using it in a business environment and using the hobbyist version. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. That's what they're claiming. And
that they could do things like basically limit how many things you could make, or limit the size, the complexity of an assembly. So there's or basically what I just make it, everything has to be free. You can't save anything to your local drive, or there's always a copy that is free on the internet. So free to use. So if you're going to go ahead and try to build a business and make stuff, you got to be ready, and not pay for your software.
Everything's going to be
You've
open
got to be
source.
ready to basically let everybody have your designs.
You have no IP.
So that's an easy way to solve that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the spin-off from SolidWorks, Onshape, I think that's their model, is basically you can use their stuff for free, and all your designs also have to be free until you buy a license.
That makes sense.
GitHub, same thing. The source code repository, it's all open to the public. If you want special stuff, you buy a license, and then you can have your own private repository. So there's a simple solution, but man, they're just not doing that. They pulled out the step file format, which is the data exchange file format.
They did put that back in.
They put it back after enough people complained. But that's not enough for me, that's not enough to say, oh, they're not going to do anything. They did it only because there was pressure right now.
Yeah, they've lost your trust.
Yeah. which is a shame. It's a neat tool. I'm happy that I can still understand lots of what's going on, but I was thinking that, oh, it'd be really neat to be able to share stuff, but shoot, that's a pain too with them.
Yeah. So I think we've gone through a lot of these items, and we're coming up. We got about 15 minutes left in our. We're trying to move this from a 2-hour SIG to a 1.5-hour SIG. It is the smallest group we've ever had yet tonight.
Yeah.
That's cool. That way we can focus on the things we care about. But is there any projects you guys have done lately, either with 360 or not, with wood or other materials, like just something that's fun? Anything else to share?
I got one. I can go get it.
That'd be great.
It's so simple. Just a minute, but
I keep wanting to get to the white tiles, Doug, but I have so many other things on the go right now, and then we're leaving on Sunday morning. So
it's a pretty easy deal. I mean, it can't get much easier than basically a can of spray paint and like one thin layer of paint on it.
I took just some paint I had and some tile that I had, but it was a green paint, which is probably the exact wrong thing for this diode laser. And I think that the tile I had was a little too tough. It did nothing.
Yeah, after you left the other night, I walked by my box of tiles and I'm like, oh man, I forgot to give them a bunch of tiles.
We got sidetracked with the bad news of what it just.
Yeah, I don't know if I had shown you some of the.
We'll try some. Or yeah, it might show. So Jerry's going to show us something now.
all right. Well, let me see if I can do this. There.
Image board.
Yeah.
Well, what was fun about this is the one of the early projects I made with Fusion is that for the first time I could do drilling. And so this was an example of drilling.
You could do drilling with a drill press. It's a lot easier to do
but
CNC.
it was fun, and so this was a fun project to make this curvage board, and I made once I had the program and put the pieces together, I made multiple copies of this thing. But like everything else, it has to be new and improved. And here's a design issue. You see how I took, this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But when you're playing the game, it's hard to count around here. So my new improvement is that they're going to be just as tight as they are here, and only just put it out there and right in here. And so from a designer point of view, I'm sitting here in CAD and say, well, this is cute in CAD, but when you get out in the street and play the game, it turns out that, man, that's hard to cut around that corner. So it's always good for CAD guys to get off their ass and get down into the real world. Sorry if I'm.
No, I've been looking for. I was asking my wife what I could do for Christmas gifts for her, her family, her side of the family, and cribbage boards came up. But I was trying to come up with something unique in cribbage boards, not just a straight rectangular cribbage board, but.
Well, I did come up with different designs. One is a circuitous path that I can show you again here, where now I'm just going to draw the line, but actually it's a pair of dots. It starts right here and it goes.
Oh, that's a neat idea.
And it goes around this particular pattern, and it did that in Fusion.
Yeah.
and then drilled that all out. So this thing here now, you can do this on the outside of the board and make all sorts of fancy stuff and scallop this all out, and it ends up
Get
being,
4-leaf clover out of it.
yeah, anyway, it becomes a very unique one that you just don't see on the internet. And so anyway, those are fun things.
That's a cool one. I like that. Like I say, I've been looking online at different ones and trying to get ideas, and I haven't
All
found
right,
one I love yet.
this I spent probably more time. These are machined out
Brass.
of brass, and then this is out of stainless, but there's no CAD. I didn't have a mill to do that. That was all done by hand.
Ooh.
Wait a minute, what do you mean that you did that? I mean, the brass you could turn on your lathe, but
Well, I have a metal lathe,
you have a metal lathe. Okay, there you go.
and
Yeah, cool.
so anyway, this is a way too much time goes into this, but it's what's kind of fun about it is if you're going to send out like Christmas gifts or something to relatives, um, you can make these, and they're sort of novel.
Yeah.
If you want to make a clover leaf, by all means, go for it.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. Yeah, like I say, I'm looking for something. Not sure if I'm going to get things done. I'm losing 5 weeks to travel between now and Christmas, so I'm not sure how much I'll get done. But yeah, that's kind of a cool one. You got anything new to show us, Doug?
No, not for CNC. I still need to get, I'm getting real close to get something going on my, I don't have a vacuum for my machine yet, but I now have the 5-gallon bucket. I've got the turbo separator, right?
Mhm.
And I've had this now for a few weeks, and this is the shoe to basically attach the vacuum to,
Okay.
and the CNC goes through here.
Right.
So I just need to get some epoxy, glue some magnets in it, and then find some brushes or something. But otherwise, my last thing I did still has been the plaque that we did 2 months ago,
Right.
I think. Because I want to be able to basically keep it clean, because it's in my garage with everything else. So I need something to, and I can't just stand there with the vacuum the entire 3 hours or.
Well, the vacuum boots are quite handy.
Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, I haven't made anything other than other stuff around the house. Nothing with digital tools.
Well, this has been a nice little SIG. It's the smallest one, like I say, smallest one we've had yet. But maybe people celebrate Columbus Day more than I thought, or Indigenous Rights Day, or Canadian Thanksgiving. I'm not sure which, but
I think it's mainly the probably the flyer going out, the email going out to remind people.
Promotion side, because we were at 25 people, particularly in the early days when there was when we were doing more of a lesson approach.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what we should get back to. If you have any subjects you want me to cover, please feel free. Give me a little warning so I have time to do a little homework and research and make sure that I'm giving a well-rounded presentation, not just the way I've done things in the past. That'd be great. I'm going to go to once a month now, so the second Monday of the month. So I think the next one is November 9th, if I'm not mistaken. But feel free to contact me in between, either directly, if you have my contact info, or through the forum works well. I pay attention.
Let me ask the question. This is just about the way the club operates, but so there are other SIG groups that have to do with CNC.
Yes.
And so, well, that's fine. They got an NC file or something like that, and then they got their equipment and they want to run it. And so how do they get their definition of a design or configuration or something? And how is that done? And why why don't they need to be used in something like Fusion to create their NC,
Toolpath. Yeah.
the
Some of them
CAD
are
part?
using some of them are using VCarve Pro. Some are using Aspire.
Are those CAMs or CADs?
Well,
Or
Some
are
of them
they
want to be
just,
both. That's the
they're a bit
thing.
of, yeah. VCarve is kind of a 2D tool or 2.5D tool. You can import 3D objects and sculpt them, but you can't really create a very good 3D object within VCarve. I understand that you can do more of that in Aspire, although I haven't used it. So my approach would be to design it in Fusion 360 as a 3D object and then import it into something like VCarve. And my next step is to learn how to leave VCarve out of it and generate the G code. It makes me a little nervous because, as you mentioned, you got to really check your G code, or things can go south on you quickly. And I found that VCarve generally does pretty good. I do see problems with the vertical axis going awry once in a while on the Shapeoko 3. I had it happen today. I was doing a new inlay, and when I was finished, it was clear that the clearing path hadn't gone low enough by like about 100th thou.
Wow.
And so fortunately I had enough time. I reran the last clearing pass to take that out. And then I reran the last VCarve routine as well.
So
and
just
that's-
by running the same toolpath, it then cleared?
Well, what happened, I think part of what happens is I'm not sure if it's related or not, it was just a red herring, but I'll take multiple segments, multiple tool paths within VCarve that use the same tool and output them as one file. And that's when I've been most likely to have a problem.
Okay. So then what you did was you did that and something didn't work. So then you took and just did the separate toolpath and then just ran that and it did fine.
That's correct. And I had this happen last week too. Actually I was doing a part of this bear paw, and I was doing the material was too thick, so this slides into a slot in my whiskey sample box, and the slot is a 1/2 inch wide, and my material was 5/8. So there's an area here around that is, let's see, can we see it?
Yeah, we can see that.
We can.
Yeah, right. So I recessed it and then chamfered it with a V-bit. And as I was cutting this, there was multiple steps, and I noticed one was going too deep. So I quickly stopped it. The first pass was going deeper than it should have, but it didn't go deeper than the second pass. So it didn't cut into what it wasn't supposed to cut into.
Yeah.
But I crashed it and restarted, and did it individually, and it worked. So and this is like the third time it's happened. I was suspicious of and there's a whole discussion going on in the forums about this with Rex and a bunch of other people. Like Rex got really choked about it, and it's warranted. He keeps turning out, trying to make something, and the results are crap.
Well, he made a number of signs, and they totally messed up because it was dropping Z.
And so
I have
Yeah.
not yet had that happen ever.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, they
It'll
were
probably
thinking-
happen tomorrow, but
They
Well,
were thinking it was the machine, but it's more and more. It sounds like the
It's-
software.
I'm not sure because there one person had a bit move in the collet, and I know that can happen. And when it first happened to me, I was like, you know what? I bet you it was the bit in the collet. And then it didn't happen the next couple times for me, and I was making extra sure to tighten the collet extra hard. And but then it did start to happen again. And last week when it happened, when it went too deep, when I then went and checked the zero height, it was too high. Like the tool went too low, but afterwards when I crashed it and double checked where the Z equals 0 was, it was above the surface of the material, which was my Z equals 0. So I really don't get that. It was cutting too deep, but then it was showing it too high. So I just started over, re-zeroed everything, and did it. And today I had to re-zero a couple times too.
so was your Z 0 point? Did it moved?
Yes.
That's scary.
So the Z 0 point moved. I'm pretty sure it wasn't the bit because I've been extra conscious of really making the collet tight. I had another theory was that it was pushing too hard, and the stepper motor was missing steps. But so to try and address that, I use ramps on everything now. I didn't initially use ramps on everything. Now I use ramps whenever I use an end mill. And I use a ramp on anything when it enters the wood. And it seemed to reduce the incidence of the problem, but it's still occurring. Now the Shapokos at the shop are getting a rework. We're going to take out the belt-driven Z-axis and replace it with, I think, a screw drive. I'm not sure quite when that's happening. I think it's coming up shortly.
You know, an idea for the collet, if you're using an 1/8 inch bit or something like that, just find a little piece of drill rod that is underneath 1/8 inch, make it a 1/4 inch long, and put it up in the same hole that the bit's going. When you tighten the collet, bottom it all out so it can't go anywhere. And that is a positive way to place the bit where you want it, of which you can't go any deeper.
Right.
If that is something that is of concern, maybe for a while you try that. And if
If you have an up spiral bit, it can actually pull it down if your collet's not tight enough.
I thought you were talking about your plunge cut was too hard.
That was part of what I was suspecting today. But other people were having problem with the bit going too deep. And the theory, the initial theory was if the collet's not tight enough, you have an uplifting bit, it can create tension and pull it down. But I don't think that's the problem. I don't. I think there's a problem. There's some kind of a software hardware problem in there where the Shapoko is losing its Z equals 0. I haven't seen it on the XL, so I'm trying to use the XL or XXL. I'm trying to use it more, but that's a weird one. It's a foxhole. We can go down for a rabbit hole, whatever.
We can spend a lot of time on that one.
Something.
But
Kinda really-
no, that would be very disheartening because after you've been milling for an hour and a half and then lose the part.
Yeah, it can be.
So anyway,
I only had it go bad with, like you say, things can happen. So I did a lot early on, especially when it's new to the CNC. Like the bear claw that I did there, I did probably 5 of those in oak and poplar first to try different things and figure out what's going on and see what works and make sure I actually understand this process.
well, I can say that all my mistakes are pretty much operator error.
That's good. You like it that way because then
You like it that way, exactly, because it isn't the equipment, and
right.
you know when it isn't delivering. you know, there was a point in time when I was making holes and the holes were oval. And I go, well, that's not right. What's going on here? Well, that's the difference between X and Y. Well, why is X and Y going to be different? It's either climbing or it's milling or conventional milling. And, you know, you just gotta spend time debugging the machine and getting it so that it'll perform the way you want it. So I ran a lot of test cases.
Mhm.
Little 1-inch squares. I'd mill them and mill them and mill them, and then do it at different feeds and speeds, and find out what the accuracy was of that feature. But it's easy to do. I mean, it's just downstairs. So
Yeah, that helps a lot. I haven't gotten to that.
there's nobody else using it, you know. So whatever terrible shape it's in, it's because of myself.
Yep.
You don't have to clean up and be out of there in 3 hours.
So
Okie doke. Well, I think it's been a good one, guys. I'll get the video posted, and then we'll see you guys again, hopefully with a few more compatriots in about a month.
all right. Well, listen, it was. I'm glad I joined tonight, or
Pleasure meeting you, Jerry.
joined the meeting,
Yep,
and
nice to meet you.
it was nice to get to know all of you.
You bet. And
I
hopefully we'll
too.
see you
I
more.
got problems I can't solve.
It's a great community for that.
All right. Have a
Take
good
care. Good night, guys.
bye.
All right. Good night.